It is October 4th, 2022. We are here at the Carlisle County Historical Society. My name is Blair Williams, and I am interviewing Steve Mellen. Did I get that right?
That's right. That's correct.
All right. So, Steve, the first question I have for you is where were you born and raised?
I was born in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, Lycoming County. At the time, my parents were living in Muncie, Pennsylvania. And I moved to Carlisle, Cumberland County in 1956. And I've been here other than the time that I was in the service. I've been here ever since.
Well, so the next question I have is just what were your earliest memories of going to church?
Uh, I think my earliest memories of going to church were when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, going to church in Muncie, Pennsylvania. And that's where I lived in Muncie until I was 6 and then moved to Williamsport. But and I remember that church was my grandfather owned the furniture factory in Usville, Pennsylvania, and he was instrumental in building or getting the church. The church was an old World War II chapel. It was government surplus that they had, and he was instrumental in because there was no Catholic church in Muncie, and he was instrumental in bringing that church to Muncie. I just remember going to church there. We always went to Sunday Mass with Grandma and Grandpa. They lived upstairs from where we lived in an apartment building. So those are my first memories of fun.
But do you have any other childhood recollections of going to church, or is it pretty much just those early memories?
Yeah, those early memories, and was always. We went to church as a family. I don't remember too much about being in Williamsport, going to church there, other than my first communion. I remember that Sunday, but I don't remember too much of anything else in Williamsport. And then we moved to Carlisle in '56, and was always going to the 9 o'clock mass, which was what they called at that time the children's mass. And you actually didn't sit with your family. The children went in and sat in the center, and then you met your family after mass. Then.
Well, I imagine, and I might be mistaken, but you mentioned the Muncie Church sort of being a government surplus chapel. Was that? I'm assuming that was very different than the one in Williamsport, and then also the Shrine Church on Pomfret.
Yeah, it was pretty. It was just a plain. Actually, it looked like an old barracks with a steeple on it. Is what it looked like. The old World War II barracks, and that's probably what it was. Those buildings were probably all the same, and it was just plain. I don't remember too much about the pews in them, but it was there was no fancies, no decorations, nothing like the church in Williamsport. Was a fairly large church, St. Boniface in Williamsport. The church has since burned down and been rebuilt. I remember, they probably weren't as big as I think, but I remember big columns in them. And I remember sometimes you had to sit behind the column and you couldn't see anything. And then when we moved to Carlisle, naturally it was the Shrine Church downtown that we went to. The other church wasn't built yet.
Was that a bit of, I don't want to say culture shock, but just a different experience, or did it not really register?
I don't think it registered with me as a kid. It didn't really register. It was just another church.
Sure. Well, so you mentioned that you came to Carlisle and St. Pat's in '56. What were your first memories of going to St. Pat's?
I don't know that I don't remember anything that stands out. It was, I know in '56 through the '50s, it was the parish was small, I remember after probably being here maybe a year or so, you knew everybody. I think at the time there were only about 300 families in the church, as compared to, I don't know what we have now, about
A lot more than
3,000 or something, I guess.
Now, did your family move because of work or?
Yes, my father, my grandfather owned a furniture factory, and there was a fire at the furniture factory in the year at 47, the year I was born, and he was never able to recover and go back into the business that he had before the fire, and eventually I think they went bankrupt, and then he sold the business. That put my father out of a job, and my dad went to work for the Internal Revenue Service, and he went to school in Philadelphia. I can remember that, living in Williamsport, and he would be away all week and just come home on weekends. And once he finished school, they assigned him to Carlisle. There was a IRS office right across the street here at the old post office. And he worked there until they opened the federal building in Harrisburg, and then they moved the office over there.
The family stayed in Carlisle?
We stayed in Carlisle, yes. Yeah. Yeah, he looked at a couple other places, but we stayed here and looked at Mechanicsburg and get closer to Harrisburg, but we never did move.
Were you living in downtown or sort of in the
We
outskirts?
actually lived on Pitt Street, two blocks down from where I live right now. We lived bought a house in the 500 block. Well, when we first moved to Carlisle, we lived on Willow Street in the 200 block. We rented a house, and then he bought a house in the 500 block of South Pitt Street. And we lived there, and he lived there until my mom and dad moved to Myrtle Beach in 1986. So he lived there until then.
So you probably live 3 or 4 or maybe a little bit further away from the church on East Pomfret then?
Yeah, it was about 4 blocks, 5 blocks, I guess.
All right. So were you pretty active then in the parish or
Yeah, that was probably our church, but it was mostly our social life when we were young. I went to St. Patrick's School on Popper Street from 4th to 8th grade. We would walk home from school. My father would take us to school in the morning when he went to work. And then we would walk home for lunch. And then he would take us back after lunch, because he came home for lunch every day too. And then in the afternoons, I have a sister and 2 brothers, and we would walk home in the evenings. And then we were involved in Boy Scouts and Alder Boys and the youth group, and so pretty much our social life was revolved around the parish.
did that include your parents too? Or was it mainly just the kids?
Pretty much so, yeah. I mean, my mother was involved she was a Cub Scout den mother, and my father was involved with back then it was the midget football program, now the Athletic Association, but he was involved with that.
And then, so that was only, still through 6th grade, or was it through 8th grade?
To 8th grade.
Okay. And then presumably did you go to high school
No.
or Trinity?
No, I didn't. Trinity wasn't there.
Okay.
Trinity wasn't built when I was in high school. I actually went to the seminary
Okay.
after 8th grade. Around around 7th grade, I thought that's what I wanted to do, was become a priest. And at the time, in the 60s, they were still sending young men out of 8th grade to what they called the minor seminary. And so I went to school in Erie, Pennsylvania, at St. Mark's Seminary High School.
Wow.
For 4 years. I went to 4 years of high school. So my high school years are, most of the friends that I had from grade school, I didn't see anybody anymore. So I had very, very few local friends, other than the kids that I played with in the summertime. And I was involved in Little League baseball. But most of my friends from grade school kind of lost touch while I was in high school.
And is that when you went into the service or after following?
I decided, probably my senior year, that I did not want to be a priest, but I'd already been accepted to Gannon University, which was part of the seminary program. And I went to Gannon University for a year. And I couldn't afford to go back to Gannon at the time. That time, I guess, my sister would have been going to Trinity. So, and my brother, he might have been in Trinity also. So, and we didn't have the money to send me to college. So I came back and I went to Hack for 2 semesters. And I realized I was going to get drafted. I had taken some courses, college courses, while I was in high school. So I didn't fit if you were going to a community college, 2-year community college, I had enough credits to actually be would have been a junior credit wise. And in the second semester, and went to the draft board, and they told me that I would probably get drafted around April. And so I decided to go into the Air Force to stay away from going to Vietnam. And I took an early enlistment. So I enlisted in Air Force in January, and in May I went so I could finish that semester at Hack, which I never did finish anyway, but that's either here or there.
So my math is probably terrible. Was this 67?
This would have been 66.
66, okay.
Yeah. I graduated in 65, finished a year of college in 66, and then, well, it's actually 67. It was in May of 67 is when I went into the service.
And so that was the Air Force.
Right.
And then how long were you in the Air Force then?
4 years.
4 years?
And actually 4 years, 1 month and a couple of days. I took it. I was assigned. I got an assignment to Berlin, Germany, West Berlin, and as a 1 year or a 1-term enlistee, if I extended my term or my duty station for exactly 3 years, then the government would ship me back at their cost, not my cost. So I did that. I took an extension so that I was in Germany exactly 3 years. I got to Berlin, Germany, July the 5th or 4th, 1968, and left Berlin July the 5th, 1971.
And then you mentioned earlier that was pretty much the only time that you were out of Carlisle.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming
4
that you
years.
came back to Carlisle.
Right. Came back to Carlisle.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what was attending, or were you active in sort of, I don't know, let's say, was it chaplaincy or sort of religious services in the service, or is that pretty much just a background?
That was pretty much, yeah, I kind of got away from, I went to mass every once in a while, I guess.
Okay.
But we did have our son baptized in the chapel, the Air Force chapel in Berlin, Temple off Air Force Base. Let's see, I guess Elaine and I met, 60, 66, 67, I guess. And we got married. I came home then, and I was in Germany for 18 months. And then I came home. We got married, and Elaine moved back to Germany with me. And so we lived in Berlin for 18 months
Okay.
before, and we lived. I didn't have enough rank to get government housing, so we lived on the German economy. We lived in an apartment in right downtown Berlin for a year, and then by that time I had enough rank and time in service, and we moved into government housing. Excuse me, from January to April, or January to when I came home in July, I guess. Yeah, our son was born in April in the Berlin, the Army Hospital in Berlin.
Well, then when you came back to Carlisle, of course, that's right around the time that the church was in the process of moving to Marsh Drive as well.
By the time we came back, it had already moved.
I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah, we got married in December 1969. The first person who visited me from the church or visited us from the church after we got married was the chairman of the building committee for the church out at Marsh Drive. I think we'd been married 5 days, and he came looking for a pledge.
Yeah. Was that Jonas Worrell or?
It was actually, the gentleman's name was, that's terrible.
I'm sure it's in the
Yeah.
archives.
He was the chairman of the building fund at the time. He was the general manager for PP&L in the area.
Okay.
First name was Bob. I can't think of his last name. Bob Madalonis was the gentleman's name.
And so that's interesting. So did you get married at the Shrine Church?
Yes.
Okay.
At the Shrine Church.
And they said, marriage was great, but it's time to move. So did you start going to services on Marsh Drive, or when you came back?
When we came back, yeah, I guess we mostly went to Marsh Drive. We went to either. I can remember going to. Of course, maybe they didn't have a Thanksgiving service. I can remember going time after the kids were. We also have twin daughters who were born 16 months after Stephen was born. I can remember taking all 3 kids to the Shrine Church for Thanksgiving. We went to a mass on Thanksgiving morning. So I guess we probably went to both churches. I guess it didn't really. I mean, we got to the point where we would take turns going because the three little kids that age, you didn't all pack them up every Sunday and take them to church. So we'd go either in the evening or depending on what we were doing.
Well, I'm wondering, are there any pastors that stood out to you over the course of your membership at St. Pat's?
Yeah, a lot of them, I think. I guess the first pastor the pastor who was here when I moved to Carlisle in 1956 was Monsignor Schmidt. And Monsignor Schmidt he was pastor from 1940 to 1957. And he was kind of like somebody's grandfather. I can remember serving mass. At that time, we would serve daily mass, and usually you got to serve it for a whole week. And there were two masses: a real early mass and a later mass. Both of them you didn't lose any school if you went to serve this mass. Masses were before school started, but back in those days, you couldn't. We still fasted before. You couldn't eat from midnight until the time of mass, if you were going to receive communion. And one of the good things about serving with Monsignor was that there was a little mom and pop grocery across the street from the church. And he used to send you over there for after mass for donuts and chocolate milk. So that then the pastor after that was Monsignor Matter, or well, he wasn't a Monsignor when he was the same pastor, he was just Father Matter. And he was the one that convinced me, along with the principal, the nun who was the principal, that I should be a priest and go to the seminary. After that was Father McGinley was the next pastor. He moved here in the 60s, and his sister moved here with him to be his housekeeper, and her son was my age, and we became good friends. So there was, I mean, I was still that, I had something to do with the church almost all the time. Tony, his name was Tony Lobato, and Elaine and I double dated with he and his wife, or the girl became his wife. And we actually went to the drive-in one night in the pastor's car. And after that, I guess it was Father Roberts. And Father Roberts had been here as a assistant pastor when I was in grade school. And then he became the pastor. And I guess he was the pastor when we got married. Yes, because he baptized our girls. And then when Father Roberts left, that's when Father Fontenelle came. And Father Fontenelle, that's who I worked for.
Well, that was my next question is, at some point, you were hired by the church, though, right?
Yeah.
So what was that? What made you decide to apply for that position?
Well, it's kind of a funny story in that Elaine was working at the church at the time, and I got involved with the parish festival. I was working at the time for, I think the company now is called Northwestern Supply down on Pomfret Street. It used to be called Carlisle Plumbing and Heating, and I was working there. But I got involved with the parish festival. Every summer we would have a parish festival for 3 or 4 days. And after the festival, one night we were sitting around after we had closed up, and I mentioned to the assistant pastor, I mentioned that the assistant pastor was there, and we were talking about the building and the parish and the state of the buildings. So usually that's what whatever we raised the money for was usually at that time, because the buildings were in really bad shape in the 70s. Most of the money went to something like that. And I had mentioned to a group of people, and the assistant pastor happened to be there and overheard me. And I said, there were 3 or 4 guys working for the church part-time. And I kind of mentioned, if you'd, take this job, I'll come in and help Father straighten this out. And it, I didn't really think that was going to happen. I knew how much usually the church was going to pay because it was, and so somewhere it got back to the pastor, Father Fontenelle, and I think he mentioned to Elaine that he wanted to talk to me, and I said, "What about?" And I said, "Well, he can't pay me for what I'm making now, I'm sure." And so I kind of let it go. Another month went by, and he came and talked to me, or he said something again, and so I went and talked to him, and I talked to him. I was the office and credit manager at Carlisle Plumbing and Heating. And I was probably working 48 hours a week. And I talked to Father about coming in and giving him a hand and doing the work. And he talked to me and he told me, he said, I'll hire you. I'll keep the guy. There was a full-time guy at the school. He said, I'll keep him on. And you come to work for me. I'll pay you whatever you're making now. I'll give you the same amount of vacation and whatever. And you only have to work 35 hours a week. So I went home, I talked to Elaine, I talked to the kids. That sounded pretty good. First week I worked 35 hours a week. That was the only week I ever worked 35 hours a week. But it was a good job. There was a lot of work to do. The buildings were in pretty bad shape, but we had some good people at the time who were in the parish. That was the time. That was about that time, or a little bit shortly before that. PPG had moved to town, and that little parish of 300 families grew really fast because they brought in people from Pittsburgh, and most of the people in Pittsburgh were Catholics. And the man who was the plant manager at PPG would get his crews to come in and help Father doing painting and fixing it and so on and so forth. So there was a pretty good group at the time to get those kind of things done.
I'm just wondering, what year were you hired?
1978.
1978.
Father Fontanella came in 1976.
Okay.
And I started in August of 78 at the beginning of the school year, or middle of August, I guess.
Now, was most of your work focused on the Shrine Church, or was it both facilities? Really?
Both facilities. Yeah, both facilities. 2 cemeteries. At that time, there was a small chapel in Newville that was in a parishioner's basement, although I didn't have too much to do with that because he kind of took care of it. But I still had to handle the insurance parts of it, things like those kind of things. And we had a chapel at Pine Grove Furnace State Park. And out at Marsh Drive, we just had the church, but we had a farmhouse and a barn out there. When we bought that land, that was a 32-acre farm. We kept the house and we rented it out. So that was, it was the whole shebang.
So, how long were you in that position for?
35 and a half years.
Wow. So that would have been 2001?
2013.
2000. Wow.
2013, I retired.
Okay. And so, did the job change much over the course of those 35 years?
Quite a bit. I think I have a job description from when I first started. It was 2 pages. My job description when I left was probably about 22 pages. But it went from just the church out there at Marsh Drive to what's there today. I mean, that was the school was built in the 80s. It kind of seemed when Father and I first talked about me going to work there, I said we talked like maybe it would last 5 years or so.
Yeah.
But every time I turn around, about every 5 years or every 6 years, we were building something new or putting an addition on or needed a new roof someplace, and it just kept going. And by the time I left, there were 9 buildings. 32, 40, about 40 some acres of land, well more than that, because we had the cemetery, we have a cemetery in North Middleton Township. And eventually I became the cemetery manager. That we had, when I first started, there was a volunteer who was doing that. And then when he left, there was a retired military gentleman who took over as the kind of the cemetery manager. Now I did the maintenance work. Didn't dig the graves or anything. We contracted all that out, but I mow the grass and all those things.
Well, my next question is, so when you were hired, there was the one full-time gentleman working at the school you mentioned, and I think you said previously that there were a few part-time people that helped out. I'm assuming with the growth of the various campuses that the staff also grew.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Were there any specific individuals that really stood out to you, or that were over the course of those 35 years?
Couple. I think the first one would be a gentleman. His name was Paul Spiegelmeyer. The gentleman that, or the man that was working when I first started, he worked for maybe 4 or 5 years, and then he took a job at one of the plants in town. I think it might have been Maslin's. And he left and went there, and so we had a series at the time of school janitors, and Mr. Spiegelmeyer was a school janitor. Mr. Spiegelmeyer was in his 80s, but the kids loved him. He liked what he was doing. I know when we first, I don't remember who hired him. I don't know whether the principal did or I don't think Father Fontanello did. I don't think he would have hired somebody that old just because he knew what was. But Mr. Spiegelmeyer he was a pretty good worker. It took him a little while to get things done. And then there was another gentleman. His name was Charles Redline. Charlie worked for us for probably 25 plus years, and he was also the basically the school janitor is what his job was. But he was also for a while we had our own buses to take the kids to Trinity. The kids from Trinity are too far away, the Carlisle School District, to whatever school district Trinity's in. I think it might be West Shore. But you can only transport kids 14 miles from one district to another. And if you went farther than that, the public school Carlisle did not have to transport. So the kids from Boiling Springs that were from St. Pat's and lived in the Boiling Springs School, there's South Middleton School District, with Cumberland Valley School District, they got transportation to Trinity, but the kids from Carlisle didn't. So we had our own bus, and Mr. Redline he was also besides the school janitor, he was the bus driver, and he worked for us until he was retired. So, and he wasn't quite, 65 or whatever the age was that he could get his full retirement. And I think maybe back then you had to be 70. By the time you worked if you were 70, you could work as many hours as you wanted later. But if you were below that, then you had to, for every hour or every so much money you earned over, you had to pay basically cut your Social Security. So Charlie didn't work in the summer times. He just worked in the winter, and in the summertime he would take off. So the summertime I would hire kids, or high school kids, college kids. I used to try to hire a 9th grader and keep him for 8 years if I could.
Yeah.
And I did that a couple of times. Hire him right out of after 8th grade or something, or 9th grade, when he was old enough, and then keep him all through college if we could do that. But Charlie was a real character. Uh, and he worked for us even after he retired. He would come in and we'd call him in if we had, one of the guys was sick or was off or something. But other than that, I don't think those were the two. We did have a young gentleman, his name, I don't remember his last name, his first name was Patrick. And Patrick was, he lived by himself, but he was a little mentally challenged. And he had a mentor that would look after him. And we hired him as the school janitor. I think he was there before Charlie. And Patrick would clean the cafeteria. That was when we were still down on Pomfret Street. The school was in the building that's now the daycare center. The cafeteria was over in the basement of the rectory. And so after lunch, that was Patrick's job, was to clean the cafeteria. And there was a telephone in the cafeteria. And we used to get all kind of calls, people wanting to sell us things. And Patrick, they would call, and we told Patrick, don't answer the phone. Just let it go. But he would answer the phone, and they'd get Patrick on there, and they'd realize that Patrick wasn't all there quite. And they would say, Patrick, how'd you like a toaster oven? And Patrick would, yeah, he'd like a toaster oven. And they would say, well, then what you have to do is you have to buy this case of floodlights. So Patrick would say yes. About 2 weeks later, we'd get this big case of floodlights. And we kept telling Patrick, no, don't do this. But so one morning, Patrick didn't show up to work. And so I went over and he only lived around the corner of Pepper Street. So I went over and banged on his door in his apartment. Patrick had 6 toaster ovens in his, or whatever they were, in his apartment. I said, Patrick, where'd you get all these? He said, nice people send them to me, he said. Other than that, there weren't too many. Yeah, those two older gentlemen were. I had the guys that are there's one gentleman still working out there now. I hired him in 1999, I think. And then there was the other gentleman that worked out there. He was probably there 15 years or better. He just passed away. Just this past month. But we're pretty fortunate with the people that we hired that they stayed on. There wasn't a whole lot of turnaround. Sometimes with the younger guys, where you'd hire a younger guy, and young guys, the guys on the bottom of the barrel always had to work the evening shifts. And they didn't like to do, especially the young kids didn't like to do that. So you might, they might change with you every 6 months or a year or so.
So was that while you were working with the church, did you also serve in any committees or ministries?
Yeah, I did mention the festival. I kept doing that, the festival committee. Once we moved from Pomfret Street to Marsh Drive, we tried to have festivals, but we depended down there. It wasn't so much the parishioners that supported the festivals, but it was the people in the neighborhood. So once we moved out there, they kind of fell off. I was the chairman of the festival committee. I was on the school board. I was a member of the PATS organization, which is the parent teacher organization. I was involved with the athletic association. I was a member of, I am a member of the Knights of Columbus, and I was involved with the Knights of Columbus, although Knights of Columbus really isn't a parish organization. We're associated with St. Pat's, but the Knights are a national organization. But I was involved with the Knights of Columbus. I was the youth director of the Knights of Columbus when my kids were little. Yeah, I think that now involved with the archives committee, and I'm also on the cemetery board.
So with all those organizations, were there people that you remember working with over the years?
Yeah, a lot of them are probably dead. One guy was the guy that got me involved in this. I think when I got involved with the parish festival committee, a gentleman named Bob O'Brien. And he was also a member of the Knights of Columbus. The other thing is my father was living here until 1986, and he was involved in a lot of these things in the parish when he was younger. But even when after I was married, he was heavily involved in the Knights of Columbus. He was also involved in the Holy Name Society. He had a blood bank. I would help him with mailings and stuff, but I wasn't involved too much in that. And he was involved with the festival, being the money man that he was as an IRS agent. He was treasurer of a lot of the organizations when he was involved in the parish. So I kind of got involved with him, and with things that he was doing too.
I'm assuming that you also sent your kids to St. Pat's.
We did. We sent our kids to St. Pat's from the time they went to kindergarten at Latour because St. Patrick's didn't have kindergarten back then. And then they went to St. Pat's. My daughters, so they were twins. They went from 1st to 5th grade. My son went from 1st to 6th grade. Then we had an unfortunate incident with the principal, and we took our kids out. Elaine actually worked for the principal. Elaine was the first paid secretary at St. Patrick's, and she worked for the principal for 2 years, 5 years. So then our kids went to Carlisle, went to Carlisle High School. We had kind of talked about it. My brothers and my sister went to Trinity, and when I would come home from the seminary or later, when I was in deep service in college, I was kind of the one that would relieve my mom from driving back and forth to Trinity all the time. One of the things that it's not so bad now because there's a lot more kids from the school going there, from Carlisle going to Trinity. And so you have a lot more chance for parents to carpool or whatever. But back in those days, there weren't very many. The bus would take the kids down in the morning, the bus would bring them back in the afternoon. If they had any after-school activities, somebody had to pick them up. We were fortunate that my father by that time, had the office had moved from Carlisle to Harrisburg, and he was working in Harrisburg. So he could pick them up on his way home from work at night, which meant usually if they had something right after school, they were finished at 4:00, they had to wait till 5:30 till he got off work, so they had to find a spot. And we had kind of decided that we weren't going to send our kids to Trinity High School. Elaine was a Carlisle High School graduate. If the school districts here are good, so we did send them to St. Pat's and would have taken them out after 8th grade had we not had the incident. Yes.
Well, there's an essence. You mentioned that you were, I think, on was it the school board?
I was on the school board.
Yeah, so I figured that you were sending your kids if you were on the school board, but I wasn't certain. Well, you were obviously, over the course of those 35 years, also involved with, you mentioned every 5 or 6 years you were adding a new building or new roof or something. Were there any of those projects that really stand out to you as either because they were great to work on or they were just a pain?
Uh, Both.
Yeah.
I think um, I wasn't involved in the school program, the building of the school in the beginning. There was a building committee.
Mhm.
There was a finance committee to raise the money. I did meet with the building committee when the school was being built. Um, but I didn't get directly involved until right before the building opened. And then it was mostly trying to figure out how to get things from here out there and so on and so forth. Shortly after, when we built the building, the school board and the principal, had kind of given us a blueprint to go by, that they were going to have, one of each class through eighth grade, a kindergarten, and so on and so forth. Shortly after we moved into the building, they kind of changed their tune and wanted to have 2 of this and 2 of that. Well, we were only in there 5 years and we ran out of room. So in 1995, we put an addition on. And I was really involved with that because Father Fontenelle said, I don't want the same thing happening again that happened, that we have to, 10 years down the road, we got to put a new addition or put something on the church. So I was really involved in the addition. We had a project manager who was a gentleman from down in Hanover. And I worked with him day in and day out on that project. We did have trouble with, trouble, I don't say, they were really hard on us for some reason. Was the South Middle Township. I mean, they're rough to work with. I don't know if they still are. I haven't been involved since 2013 when I retired, but they were really rough to work with. So that was frustrating. It was frustrating every time we'd think we were 3 steps forward, and all of a sudden we're 2 back or 3 back or 4 back or whatever. When we did the Parish Activity Center, I was rather than Father Forey was in the pastor when we started. That was an ongoing project. We tried, before Father Fontenelle left in 2013, he realized that we needed more room, that we should start. And we tried to do a fundraiser to get this underway, and we didn't raise enough money. So we actually, in order to build that building that's out there now, we actually had 3 fundraisers. We had 3 campaigns. We didn't raise enough money in the first campaign, and rather than build anything, that we build something that it wasn't big enough, Father said, no, and then he retired. And then the next pastor was Father Walberscheid, who became a bishop. He's the auxiliary bishop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he tried to start a campaign. That was a tough sell after Father Fontenelle had been here for 27 years, and to get a new pastor who was completely different. And Father Fontenelle was a people person. Father Walberscheid was a teacher. He was not, he couldn't go in and schmooze like Father Fontenelle could. So we we started another campaign, but it really didn't go anywhere. And then when Father Forey got here, Father Waldershaw was only here for 3 years. He was here from 2003 to 2006. And then Father Forey came in 2006. And was here from 2006 to 2018. We started the campaign, reached the goal that we needed to get to, and got the building built. And I was really involved in that building. I wanted to hire another project manager like we did from both the school and we brought somebody in besides the contractor. I guess when we built the school, we were actually our own general contractor. So we hired a project manager. When we did the addition to the school, we had a project manager from the construction company, but we also had this liaison. It was the same guy who was the project manager for the school. And I wanted to do the same thing when we hired we did the activity center, and Father Forey said no. He said, I think you can probably handle it. And I said, well, I can probably handle it, but another 25 hours a week will work on. But I did it. So those are and then again, we ran into problems with this township. And we were actually, when we dedicated the building, the day of the dedication, we had to get a temporary occupancy permit because the building had not been inspected and had not passed inspection. So we had a temporary occupancy permit for the one day. So we could have we thought we'd be done. Everything was going, right on down the line. But they discovered what they thought was a problem. And so yeah, then my last project that we did put the track in out there. That went fairly well. That was not a bad, except for the fact that we ran into a lot of rock and a lot of sinkholes. We had problems with sinkholes, but once you get in the way and get things going, so that wasn't quite finished when I left in 2013.
I guess you mentioned sort of dealing with or being involved with the community, both sort of in positive ways, working in terms of the parish festival and sort of having the community around the Shrine Church come and I guess be involved with that, and then also just dealing with township or municipalities. But I'm wondering, were there other community, I guess, issues that you remember the church being involved with, or just playing a role in the community?
I don't remember a lot from early on. I know that there were stories. I know that Catholics were not always welcome in Carlisle. I mean, Carlisle was not a welcoming community to the Catholic population in certain circumstances. Back in when the church burnt in 1923, there was a real good community response to help the Catholics build their church back up. And there was a pastor here who was he was the pastor. He died in 1940, and I think he was here for 20. Father Fontenelle thought he was going to have the record of being here for 27 years, and this guy beat him by a couple of months. His name was Father Welsh. He was very active in the community, and they seemed to really like him. But I can remember hearing stories, and when in the 50s that the nuns they were still wearing habits then. And they would walk uptown from down there. The convent is where the church office is right now. That used to be the old convent. Well, it was originally the rectory. But they would walk uptown to go shopping, and people would yell at them, and you know, didn't treat them very nicely. From the time that I don't know what it was like through high school and that, and how that things were community wise. But after when Father Fontanella got here, he was one who kind of went out to the community and got the community involved. The Carlisle, I always get this. Used to be the Carlisle Council of Churches, and now I think it's the Carlisle Area Religious Council. He was greatly involved in that, and the Council of Churches basically it was the Carlisle Council of Churches, basically the Protestant churches. They did include the Catholic Church when Father McGinley was here, and he was here, he would have been here in the 60s. Once Father Fontanella came, he got involved with them. And I remember there being a problem when the Jewish community at Dickinson wanted to join the Council of Churches. And there were a couple of churches when they joined, a couple of churches pulled out. And so then there was the thing called, there was a new, I don't know if it's a new organization, it was called Carlisle Ministerium. And I think Father Fontanella was involved in kind of getting that organized. And they got together, all the churches, and we have a chaplain now. There's a chaplain at the Cumberland County Home and the Cumberland County Prison. They were involved, Carlisle Ministerium and then the Carlisle Religious Council were involved in getting that chaplain hired. So things have got better. Father Walderscheid was not a big one for ecumenical. Although we did have, while he was here, the Thanksgiving, there's the Carlisle Area Religious Council has the annual Thanksgiving service, and it kind of rotates the churches. I remember that we had the Thanksgiving service at St. Pat's at Marsh Drive when Father Walderscheid was here. Father Forey was very involved with the ecumenical movement or the religious council and these things. Those are the good things. I don't remember a whole lot of bad things other than I can remember. I do know when I was probably in high school, I would imagine, because I probably would have been in the seminary. As a seminarian, during the summers when I was home on vacations, we kind of had to volunteer to work at the church. We didn't get paid, although if we did work in the cemetery, we sometimes got paid. But one of the things that we did was St. Pat's had a mission at one time in New Bloomfield. The church in New Bloomfield was a mission to St. Pat's, as was this little church in Newville. And on Sunday, the priest, or the weekend, the priest would go to New Bloomfield to say mass, but they would go up on Saturday night to hear confessions, and they would stay. There was a little apartment on the back of the church up there before the little church used to be downtown New Bloomfield, and during the winter, the boys that went to Carlisle Military Academy would serve mass on Sundays, but they weren't there in summertime. So during the summer, whatever priest went up there would usually take two altar servers with him on Saturday, and spend the night. And the altar servers, there was a hall downstairs, in the basement of the church with a kitchen, and you'd sleep down there at night. And then you'd serve mass in the morning, and then he'd bring you back. And usually, the priest and the altar servers went to dinner. There was a doctor who lived up there. They would go to the doctor's house for dinner. And I can remember going up there once with Monsignor Schmidt, and he wore his black robes with the red sash and tassel. And we walked to doctor's house. And on the way back, I can remember kids from New Bloomfield throwing stones at us, calling us the damn Catholics. And so, I mean, that was Perry County. So I don't know if it was worse up there than it was down here, but other than that, I think a lot of it in the early 50s, Catholics were tolerated. Now there were Catholics who were prominent in town. Mr. Worrell definitely. I'm sure there were others, but I think we were just kind of tolerated it. And I think that changed a lot in the 60s. That's when PPG moved to Carlisle and built a factory. And also the telephone company, Carlisle United Telephone, started buying up these small phone companies. And they bought a big one in Butler, Pennsylvania. And that was about the same time that PPG came, and there were a whole lot of people that then the headquarters was here, and United Telephone headquarters were in Carlisle, and a lot of these people from Butler moved to Carlisle. So we had a great big influx of Catholics in the early to mid 60s, which is why we built the church when we built it, because we just didn't have enough room for all the people. So I think the attitude toward Catholics changed quite a bit at that time.
I'm really interested in these next couple of questions, which I always refer to as like metaphysical questions, because you worked for the church for so many years, and I'm wondering if that sort of played a role at all, or maybe not. But I was just wondering, sort of how your, I guess, faith journey has sort of influenced your life over the years, and whether or not that was impacted at all by being so closely involved with the church.
Truthfully, I think in a negative way, it impacted. Because as close as I was and what I did, I could see what was happening in the background. I could see the politics. So, I mean, not that it changed me that much, but I don't think it was I don't think it helped my spiritual growth, basically. I guess I could say it that way.
Well, to be honest, that was actually the answer I was kind of expecting.
Yeah, I mean, it's when I left, retired in 2013, a lot of people said, "You've been here so long, you should write a book." And I said, "You don't want me to write a book, because you'd be quite disappointed, I think, in some of the things that I'd have to say." Which is why when I do things like this, I have to be careful.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't think it. Maybe I mean, in a way it did, because I know things that I didn't know before, but and I can compensate for that. But it was yeah, it's quite an enlightenment when you sit back and you're that close and you see what's happening. And a lot of times you can't say anything about it. You can't. I mean, not publicly.
The similar question is just, was there a time when faith played a particularly important role in your life?
Um, I don't think so. Not any more than other things. And, uh, I mean, I've been a Catholic all my life. I I don't, I didn't, I don't do a lot of questioning about, it's always, my faith has always been there. Uh, but I think it's more, um, more the things in general rather than the fact that I don't think the fact that I'm Catholic or whatever, if I was something else, I don't think that would make a big difference. Uh, I'm not one for uh, kind of wearing my faith on my sleeve. Never was. I always, and I there are a lot of things that happen in the church that are going on right now that I don't disagree with, but I wouldn't necessarily join that organization or that group. Just I would rather more. I'd rather go up to Pine Grove and sit in the empty chapel up there. I get more out of that than going to a Bible study or a class or something like that.
Sure. Uh, to be honest, I don't think I've asked this question before. So it's the last one I have, and I kind of forgot it was here. So, but you reminded me of it because you mentioned being an altar server in Bloomfield. So I'm sure the question I had is just aside from that new Bloomfield experience where didn't sound overly pleasant, well, is there anything else you remember about being an altar server that stands out to you?
Uh, I do remember catching on fire one time in the church. Uh, I was probably in high school. One of the things that we did as a seminarian when I would come home for vacations, we always, were involved in all the liturgies and Christmas and the Easter Vigil and those kind of things. I don't know when this would have been, although it could have been. We had our calendar year when I was in high school was pretty much like college. We had a fall or a winter break, and I would come home for a week and a half in the wintertime when everybody else around here was going to school. And I'm assuming that's probably when it was because it was. I remember I was in a procession in the church, and I was carrying the crucifix, and there were two guys, one on each side of me, with candles. And we were doing a procession downtown in the Shrine Church. And we would come up and the center aisle, all three of us could walk in line. When we got into the side aisle, the crucifix naturally went first, and these guys came in, put in behind me. And that back then we wore cassocks and surplice. The surplice is the white gown that goes over and it caught on fire. The kid behind me hit it was probably made out of nylon or something. And the only thing what I remember, a friend's father was sitting in, I remember I saw him looking at me, and I saw him kind of get up, and all of a sudden I heard whack, and it hit me in the middle of the back to put out the fire. So that was kind of memorable as an altar server experience.
Well, that is what I have in terms of the questions that I had pre-prepared. Is there? But I always end by asking: is there anything else that you want to discuss or mention, or that a question I should have asked that I didn't?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think, I mean, I could go on about stories of St. Pat's for hours, but,
Well, that's why you're on the archives committee. You might not write a book, but you can leave
Yeah.
notes. Put them in the archive.
well, as I said, we were just talking, we were at Debbie's house for, uh, like a picnic for, she usually does that at the end of the summer and, we were talking about, how much we don't get a whole lot of work done at the,
Yes.
at the archives meetings because we usually sit around and talk about things that happened or didn't happen in the parish. And Terry Nicky is on the archives committee, and it's we get him talking about the history of Carlisle, and there's no stopping.
That is true. Well, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me here today at the Historical Society and for the St. Pat's, the Archives Committee. And yeah, it was a real pleasure. I learned a lot. So thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome.